unmute yourself. Here we go. Cool. Basically for it's going to be really noisy with this. I'm going to turn it down a bit. Basically for the past few months, I have been leading a project around designing a new social contract in a post-AGI economy or a post-AGI society. And I would love to talk to you guys about maybe some of the reasons why we are working on this project, and then also perhaps some of the ideas that we are interested in researching. In essence, this project is bringing together a consortium of leading economists, AI policy experts, and thought leaders to try to propose concrete policy interventions, strategies to guide the role of governments during the upcoming AI economic transformation. I think we're really seeing that there's a lack of a coherent vision around the responsibilities of governments in order to support human labor in the upcoming future, and not a lot of forward thinking. So we really want to set that groundwork for people. About myself, my name's Deric Cheng. I'm currently an AI policy researcher at Convergence Analysis, and I've previously hosted an expert conference on AI economic impacts. It's called Threshold 2030, if you want to find it. And then I've also conducted a lot of research on foundational AI governance policies, things like chip registries, model registries. I've done some research on soft nationalization scenarios. Before this, actually, no more than 3 years ago, I was an engineer at a quickly scaling crypto infrastructure startup. It was maybe about 9 or 10 people when I joined, and now it's valued at about 10 billion. So it was a lot of just building new teams, scaling projects up, and getting them off the ground. And then before that, I was actually doing interaction research at Google. So I was working on Google Glass, and I designed this feature for the Google Pixel Buds that allows you to do real-time translation from one earbud to another earbud. So it's pretty diverse background, but it's always been focused quite on the cutting edge of tech, I think. What is the social contract that I'm talking about here, and what do I mean by it? A social contract is essentially the implicit agreement between ourselves and the institutions that we use. It's a shared understanding of what citizens owe to their society and what society owes to them. And in economic terms, there's always been this implicit social contract that if you work hard, you can get ahead. We are expected as people to provide labor, we educate ourselves, we join the workforce, and we contribute to society. In return, our markets and governments are expected to provide opportunities, right? A job that pays a living wage, the ability to secure retirement, the chance for upward mobility. And historically, this social contract has seen a lot of evolution as we've seen technological revolutions, right? For instance, in the Industrial Revolution, we had a massive urbanization of the populace, which led to factories, to mass production, and led to a lot of problems like child labor and long hours and unsafe equipment. So essentially, over time, societies responded by forming labor movements or forming regulations around working conditions or political rights for the working class. It was the same thing in the 20th century around the Great Depression era, at least in the US, but also with effects throughout the globe, forcing a rethinking of the role of governments, right? There was mass unemployment, up to 25%. There was a collapse of the banking system. And so the US government, at least, introduced massive societal reforms around Social Security, around stronger labor rights, around public works initiatives, and also around massive government spending in a Keynesian strategy to kickstart economies, right? So I think there's a lot of precedent for revising the social contract, and it's not an overstatement, I think, right now to suggest that we are on the threshold of one of these major inflection points, and that a lot of things could change very quickly and force governments to have to respond in very novel and effective ways, right? So I'll talk real quickly about some of the underlying assumptions of this type of project. I think most of you guys will be on board or have already had a good amount of exposure to some of these ideas, but I'll run through some of the core arguments. Of course, there's kind of the argument between automation and augmentation, right? It's basically, are AI systems going to complement human labor and make us more productive, or are they going to substitute for human labor and replace us in the workforce? And I think it's pretty clear that the end result is going to be a pretty complex mix of both, depending on the sector, right? Both augmentation and automation are going to happen. But as AI continues to improve and transitions towards AGI type capabilities, trends are going to skew towards automation in the long run. And the more capable these systems become and the better the technology gets, the more likely automation will happen. The main problem with this, of course, is that automation leads to generally bad outcomes economically and societally when it comes to the labor force. You start to see a reduction in the labor share of capital. You have a lot of negative impacts like unemployment or wage stagnation. And historically, there's actually been this thing called the Engels pause that happened in Britain when they hit a lot of industrialization, where wages flatlined for a long period of time, and almost all of the wealth gained by society went entirely to capital owners because of the massive amount of automation that the factories were producing until the entire economy rebalanced and until new types of governmental interventions were applied. And it's very likely, I think, that we could see something similar to that. Some of the there's a lot of debate around what the economic impacts will look like. Of course, whether wages will go up or down, whether unemployment will stay persistent, those types of things. I think there are three things that we can stand behind that are going to lead to pretty significant changes. One of them is pretty clear, and I don't think anybody in this room would probably disagree with this, that AGI systems will lead to massive labor displacement. One of the big challenges of it is really that AI-driven automation, when it comes about, will simultaneously and rapidly affect many, many sectors that were previously unrelated. You have certain sectors or clusters of the economy where workers are focused around like tech and services, or like manufacturing or construction. And generally, people are relatively mobile within those sectors. If you eliminate all the roles within one of those sectors, you start to see pretty bad outcomes when it comes to like labor share and also labor opportunities, right? And so there's a lot of opportunity for bad outcomes for workers, both in the short term and possibly in the long term, if you start to see persistent unemployment because the labor market doesn't rebalance, or because a lot of jobs are simply not competitive for human workers to engage in. Another big one is unprecedented inequality. We really think on my team and the people that I work with that AGI will only accelerate the trends that we're seeing with inequality, and that we already have a lot of evidence that inequality is on this trend due to technological progress. Some statistics are maybe that the richest 1% own more wealth right now than the bottom 95% of the entire world's population, right? The world's 10 wealthiest individuals hold more wealth than the GDP of 85 countries at this point. And especially in the last 10 years, the top 1% have gained 74 times more wealth than the bottom 50%. This slice of the yellow, the bottom 90%, has been shrinking rapidly and steadily over the past 30 to 40 years. And the studies that analyze this attribute about 50 to 70% of this change to technological change, due to automation, due to computerization, reducing and hollowing out the middle class. And I think the evidence pretty clearly points towards automation and AI systems continuing to accelerate this trend at steeper and steeper rates, rather than maybe allowing us to reverse this trend. And there's a lot of negative outcomes because of this. One of the main ideas I think that many people are playing with is essentially that you're going to have some sort of superstar economy where you have a few corporations that are able to leverage economies of scale and AI agents in order to like capture enormous amounts of income or enormous amounts of economic growth, whereas like only a few individuals or a small portion of the human population will be involved in that, right? And that is one of the potentially main causes for this type of inequality. The last one we'll talk about is one that is not as certain, but that I think a lot of people are starting to buy into, which is that AGI will likely lead to downward social mobility. And by that, we mean that there are going to be two things. One, there's going to be fading pathways for upward mobility. And this is actually discussed a good amount by Luke and Rudolph in a few series that they've been publishing, and I know they're part of this program. The idea is essentially that the competitive advantage for lower income, ambitious individuals who are intelligent, hardworking, and capable are going to be significantly less when intelligence can be directly substituted for by AI systems. When you have capital that you can pay rather than labor, you reduce the opportunities for upward mobility, and you reduce the entry-level jobs into high-quality professions, right? And then very similarly, you could see a downward force of social mobility, where if cognitive automation happens much more quickly than manual labor automation, which is likely to be the case because the marginal cost for manual labor is pretty high, right? You have to build a robotic system, you have to deploy it into the world, you have to maintain it, you have to provide a lot of systems to support that infrastructure, whereas the cognitive labor automation obviously is much easier to diffuse, and the marginal cost per system is much lower. As a result, you might see much more rapid automation of cognitive labor than manual labor, and as a result, many people, is theorized, will be pushed downwards into these manual labor roles, more gig economy roles, more construction roles, more physical in-person roles. And overall, societally, there has been a general bias. Cognitive roles and technical roles are like better jobs for humans, right? And therefore pay higher. They require more expertise. And so a major shift downwards in that direction could lead to a lot of negative outcomes for especially a lot of cognitive labor workers. Let's see. So I'll just run through one plausible economic scenario that I think seems to align with all of these trends right now. I don't fully stand behind it, but there are a lot of ways which could be illuminative. I do think that AI systems are likely to be commoditizable on the frontier, in that there will be 4 to 5 to 6 competing labs building these top tier AI models, and that could potentially keep prices down or keep concentration of wealth among one of these to be somewhat lower than if it was a single, monopoly of AI technology. However, I think there will become an entire second class of AI-driven corporations that are focused on commoditizing or specialized commercial AI systems for certain domains. For instance, you can imagine that in healthcare, only a few companies will have all of the health data and be able to merge that with maybe the manual systems that can do IVs or stethoscopes that allow robots in order to function autonomously and to be able to scale up massively. And so there are very strong consolidating and oligopoly type forces in each of these different domains. And we imagine that perhaps all of these companies will be leveraging similar frontier AI models from the foundational labs, but also be kind of leaders or like kind of dominating in their own domains. And the real challenge with this is if you have 100 to 500 companies leading all of the new economic growth, but you have superstar firms or superstar economies where only 1,000 to 2,000 human employees are really necessary at these new firms, as opposed to 50K or 100K or a million, the way that it traditionally is right now. You could still see numbers where maybe 1 million people or like 2 to 5 million people are capturing the majority of economic growth out of the entire population of the world. And so even if this isn't as extreme as maybe just one company captures everything or one system captures everything, you still do see these like very extreme inequality factors and these extreme hollowing out of the middle class that forces a lot of people to not participate in the gains from AI economic growth, right? And it concentrated around a very small subset of elite people. So that is definitely one of the ways in which we're framing the concerns around the like AGI social contract work. So real quickly, what can we do to help governments respond to these changes? Catalyzing these foundational changes isn't going to be easy. The number one thing I think society needs, and that really is deeply, deeply neglected, is that society needs more innovative and concrete policy proposals from motivated economists, from governance researchers, and from people. I think the current discourse in terms of transformative AI around economic outcomes is very, very limited. I think most people thinking about this stuff this far ahead don't necessarily have an economics background, and that the ideas are kind of catch-alls. For instance, I think UBI is a strong idea, but it's kind of a catch-all for all the forms of redistribution that will be necessary in order to enable a flourishing human society, right, in the space of AI economic outcomes. The second thing is that societies are going to have to develop a collective consensus methods in order to rewrite our social contract. This isn't a technical question, right? It's not just how we can figure out the right ideas. It's more so how do we get everybody in society to align that these ideas are the right move forward. And this is really difficult, right? As all social policies are, because powerfully entrenched capitalistic forces are going to resist this major restructuring that is necessary because the interventions are going to threaten their economic interests. You are going to have to feel major economic impacts, like big shocks to the economy, in order to catalyze such policy discussion. Policymakers won't consider this stuff otherwise. You're going to have to get millions and maybe billions of voters to really agree that these sorts of fundamental changes to our governance is necessary in order to create a more equitable society, right? So the real question is here is how can we best propel our society and these ideas forward to design what we are going to look like after this big set of changes that are coming up in the next, I'm not going to talk about timelines, but 5 to 10 years perhaps. It's something that seems reasonable to articulate. The I'm going to talk about 4 different areas that my team is looking at. I have a consortium of economists and experts starting to write about these things as part of this program. And then I'm also leading a couple of groups of fellows to try to do hard economic policy research on some of these. And so I broke it down into 4 areas. There's obviously much, much complexity within areas, but this is a good way to start thinking about it. One of them is you start redesigning taxation or capturing revenue from the growing role of economic role of AI systems. How can you capture the value from AI systems? There are a lot of questions around this. What are the best viable strategies? What are the benefits and externalities of the strategies? And there's perhaps a dozen to 2 dozen plausible approaches. You could have automation taxes, which have been talked about, robot taxes. You could have specific alternative minimum taxes for certain corporations that fit a certain criteria, right? You could have wealth taxes on the rich. You could have a revised global corporate minimum profit tax. You could have increase capital gains taxes, as the Biden administration was talking about. You could improve your digital service tax policy. There's a lot of nuanced ways in which governments can try to capture specifically the value that is being created by this capital infusion from AI and use it more effectively, right? We actually have a few fellows doing an overall taxonomy of this space, but each of these individual ideas has a lot of work to be dug into. And I would be very happy to work with people who are interested in looking deeply into whether one of these ideas is actually a good fit for certain companies or certain countries. The second area is going to be around redesigning spending policy and redistribution. The idea of what governments should be doing, say, if we start to heavily tax AI systems in a way that is different from the rest of the economy, is a really big problem. I think there are a lot of questions around maybe what should governments invest in, like in terms of infrastructure. What are the ways in which governments can try to build out their capabilities to support their role in a new AI economy? There's potentially the ideas of subsidies for good jobs, in terms of jobs that people think are really, really valuable or that people should be working at in the long run. In the same way that the governments already subsidize farming, they might want to subsidize other jobs that people prefer to work at or that we would like people to work at. There are all the questions around the redistribution ideas, which is basically that there are maybe 100 ideas underneath the umbrella of what UBI is arguing for, which is basically the idea that everyone should have a social safety net and that everyone should have some base level of quality of life, right? You could look into for instance, universal basic services. You can look into revisions around unemployment benefits or job transition funds. This slide here is actually one that I made about a year ago, talking about how a very simple change in the US to the earned income tax credit, simply by opening it up to new individuals and to changing the curve of how it delivers value, could approximate essentially a UBI type policy for about a fifth to a tenth of the cost of what you talk about when you talk about UBI, right? And it's a policy that already exists and that is already being distributed in the US. There's a lot of nuance in these questions and not a lot of people actively researching them. I've got a couple groups of fellows. One of them is looking into essentially onshoring semiconductor supply chains back into the US to make the US semiconductor pipeline more resilient. Another group is looking at diffusion and the rates of diffusion for certain types of AI into the economy so that they would be relevant for this type of work. The third one, let's see, I've got 3 more minutes. I'll run through the last 3 and then open it up for questions. So there's a lot of questions around market incentives and pre-distributed mechanisms. So basically, how can we restructure the rules of our economy and of capitalism in order to support the type of society that we want, assuming that you're going to have a major shift of labor to capital and a major consolidation of economic resources among the top people in the space, right? And there's ideas around, for instance, public benefit corporations, stakeholder capitalism. There's ideas around reforming intellectual property so that the value of intellectual property gets more widely distributed. There's a lot of ideas around treating AI as a public utility. There's ideas around what types of legal rights akin to corporate personhood could you give AI systems and what are the impacts of that on the economy. So there's tons of questions here. And then the last one is actually rethinking public and private coordination. And so I've actually done some research on this in the space of securitization, talking about essentially ways in which the US government might start to control AI labs when it recognizes that the impact of AI systems can be quite dangerous for the military or for society. But there is also, alongside the securitization argument, also an economic argument for why the US government or other governments should be more involved with the AI labs that are developing these types of tools. And so there's a lot of questions around how AI systems should be regulated and maybe if the control of AI systems by the government would lead to better economic outcomes, right? And let me get to the last slide and then actually I think we're probably about time. So here's a quote by Eric Brynjolfsson, basically talking about why digital technologies are not necessarily a problem in and of themselves. In essence, if we can solve, the alignment problem, the structural problem of how to get AIs to work in the benefit of society, we still have all of these big outstanding challenges when it comes to the shape of society, the shape of our economy. And in the end, all of these problems are not inherent to AI or technological progress. They're really arising as a result of the societal and economic frameworks that we are choosing collectively as a society to operate within, right? These challenges really are problems of our own making. They're not problems of the technology itself. And I really believe that humanity's highest calling should be to create systems that ensure security and financial stability for everybody, so that everybody has the opportunity to achieve their full potential experientially, right? I think AGI does offer us this opportunity, the prospect of extraordinary abundance. But I think that our existing frameworks, the way that they're set up now, are going to funnel these revolutionary benefits to the few rather than many, unless we start to design and decide on some of these interventions. And so I think that the most valuable thing, honestly, that I think people could be working on beyond perhaps some stuff around alignment is really how do we design this vision for society that really truly works for everybody? How do we reimagine the ideas around our social contract? And how do we develop the tools in order to be able to use these systems in a way that truly helps us achieve what we want for our society as a whole, rather than sticking to just the traditional capitalistic or market-based forces that we are existing under because it's a default assumption. Cool. And that's time.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Deric.
Connor, yeah,
Really
I'm happy for you to.
nice. Yeah, really nice presentation. Sorry. Are you saying something? Yeah, it's fine.
Good.
Yeah, thank you so much for the really nice presentation and a lot of like questions per slide as well. Like, I think that is so crucial because every step of the way people should be asking more questions, and yeah, this was like a perfect example of that. I so there's a question by Jim in the message or in the chat. Can you give examples of who is best placed to contest AI at each part of the AI value chain? But I think this was something we already covered before from a previous talk. So yeah, that's an old question. So okay, so Nyasha here asked about what is yeah, firstly, like what a very inspiring session that you had here. And I think like my question was I had a question actually about the tax system redesign that you sort of showed. I'm wondering, and so a bit of context about me. I like shifted from Singapore to Berlin, and I suddenly realized like the tax system here is like so complicated, but at the same time, like there's definitely like a redesign coming up. So how do you think like these systems would be changed or redesigned? Because AI at the end of the day is gonna rapidly still develop or generate wealth, while also potentially like displacing all the folks who were like traditional, I guess, like labor income who were involved with that. Do you see like a shift happening in the tax system that way?
Totally. Yeah. I think our current tax systems are mostly designed around capturing income from individuals, right? I think in the US, for example, maybe 70% of the revenue from the US comes from individual income taxes, payroll taxes, Social Security, Medicare, and very little comes from the corporations. And because of tax loopholes and various ways that you can move money around, the people at the very top are able to shift the profits or capital gains or take out loans in them in such a way that they can mostly avoid large proportions of like the tax revenue system. And so I really do think that recognizing that a lot of value is going to be created by AI systems and not by human labor, and that there's going to be a lot of automation, is going to help us start to redefine the systems by which we use taxation. And I think biasing the systems to capture more of the value independently created from AI agents is going to provide a lot of revenue, especially if in the case that human labor income goes down over time, which is possible. It's
Yeah,
not entirely out
exactly.
of the question.
Yeah, definitely. I think we had one more question. I don't know if you have a quick, like one last question maybe. I think Matthias had like a question about what are your thoughts about international redistribution?
Yeah, totally. My personal thoughts, and I won't say this is the standing in for everyone that I work with, is that international redistribution is a lot more complicated and does have to involve governments in some ways, because governments are, in the end, the people who are like tasked with understanding the culture and the needs and the like values of people within their borders. And so I think imagining the idea of UBI, where the tech elite give the exact same amount of money to everyone in the world, is pretty reductive and needs to be nuanced more thoroughly. In particular, I think that there is some really interesting stuff happening with the OECD's base erosion and profit shifting framework, which essentially is leading to global corporate minimum tax reform that will allow for essentially countries around the world to capture a fair share of the profits from large multinational enterprises like Google or Amazon or Apple, which have previously been avoiding a lot of taxes because they are kind of just unhandled in the old archaic tax system that we have, and that there are ways to extend this such that the wealth generated from, say, OpenAI or Anthropic can be distributed more equitably based on the human labor that they're replacing, or based on the usage of these AI systems within countries, so that countries can get a share of profits and also therefore redistribute
Yeah.
like value back to their society in a useful way.
Got it. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, definitely. I think there's gonna be hopefully a good amount of shift that happens. But obviously, like, there's a bit of like an oligarchy also forming within how, like, wealth is being held by, as you said, a lot more people, like, lot few people, and at a way higher percentage. So yeah, hopefully this change does happen, and soon enough we need it. So yeah, thanks a lot, Derek, for like an amazing presentation here. And feel free to stick around if you see some nice projects. Feel free to let us know if you want to also, like, give your comments or your feedback. Always appreciate that. And again, thank you so much for joining in. I'm gonna pass it on, but yeah, to Joel, who's gonna come up next. Hi, Joel, are you still
So thank you
around?
for having me.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, so I guess I can share my screen in this